Hello and welcome to today's video about addition of positive and negative numbers. First, let's talk about some vocabulary words and terms that you will need to know and understand for today's lesson. Account balance. This is an amount of money that you have or that you owe. Debit. This is an amount subtracted from a bank balance. In the black. This means having a positive account balance or having more money than what is owed. In the red. This means having a negative account balance or owing more money than is available. First, let's talk about calculating account balances. In order to do this activity, I am going to draw positive and negative numbers on the screen to illustrate the numbers I am talking about. First, let's figure out how to show the number positive 5 using 9 counters. This number can be represented by using 7 positive counters and 2 negative counters. In this situation, 2 negative counters counterbalance 2 positive counters, like this. And you can see that we are left with only 5 counters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is how you would represent positive 5 with 9 counters. Next, let's look at representing negative 4 using 8 counters. In this case, I am going to use 6 negative counters and 2 positive counters. Again, you can see how 2 of my positive counters will counterbalance 2 of my negative counters, and I am left with 4 negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4, or negative 4. Finally, let's look at how to represent negative 3 with 9 counters. In this case, I am once again going to use 6 negative counters, and I'm going to use 3 positive counters. You can see that these 3 positive signs counterbalance 3 of the negative signs, leaving us with negative 3. And we are left with 1, 2, 3, or negative 3. Because negative and positive numbers often appear together when dealing with checking accounts, we are going to look now at how to use positive and negative counters to calculate account balances. We are going to pretend that we are accountants keeping track of Jane Doe's account balance. The account balance is simply the current total value of an account. Each positive counter represents $1 of cash in Jane's account, and each negative counter represents $1 of debt or money that Jane owes to someone else. An account balance is said to be in the black when there is more cash in the account than there are debts. That is, when there are more positive counters than negative counters. An account balance is said to be in the red when there are more debts than there is cash in the account. That is, when there are more negative counters than positive counters. Here, we have 5 positive counters and 3 negative counters. This shows that there is $5 in cash and $3 in debt. This shows a balance of positive $2. This means that Jane Doe's account balance is in the black. As we looked at on the last slide, you can see that these 3 negative counters cancel out 3 of the positive counters up top, and we're left with 2 positives, thus showing the $2 left in Jane Doe's account. This group of counters right here shows another situation in Jane Doe's account. In this situation, there are 8 negative counters and 3 positive counters. We need to figure out what Jane's account balance is using this information. We can see that Jane has $8 in debt and $3 in cash for a balance of negative $5. These three positives outweigh these three negatives, leaving us with these 5 negatives and Jane's account balance in the red. Now let's look at what happens if some positive and negative counters are added to or removed from Jane's account. Here are 7 positive and 2 negative counters. The account balance here is $5 because these 2 negatives cancel out these 2 positives and we're left with 5. Now we're going to add 5 positive counters and 5 negative counters to our display and see what happens. As you can see, these 5 negatives cancel out these 5 positives, and we are once again left with these 5 positive dollars in the account. When there are the same number of positive and negative counters, they offset each other, so there is no effect on the balance. Another way to say this is that the net effect on the balance is 0. Now let's look at how to find the sums of positive and negative numbers. Just for a moment, let's look back at Jane's account. Suppose that Jane has $4 in cash and no debts. Here is this situation modeled with counters. Now suppose that Jane earns $3 and adds this to her account. Here is this situation once again shown with counters. What is Jane's account balance? Well, if you count all of these plus symbols, you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So she has $7 in her account. These counters can also be modeled using numbers. This would look like positive 4 plus parentheses positive 3 equals positive 7. It could also more simply be written as 4 plus 3 equals 7. It is typically not necessary for you to write a positive symbol in front of numbers that are positive. Usually we only mark numbers that are negative because they are different from positives. Here is one more situation involving Jane. Jane has $8 in cash and no debts. This would look like this. Suppose Jane borrows $5. We're going to use counters to show this. The account balance is now $3. Here is what this looks like in a number model. Positive 8 plus negative 5 equals positive 3. Here is another number model using those same numbers. You will notice that we put this negative 5 in parentheses to differentiate the negative sign from being a subtraction sign. Now let's look at a number model and figure out how to solve this problem using counters. This problem says 9 plus negative 6 equals. We are going to figure out what this equals by drawing some counters. First, I am going to draw 9 positive counters because I have positive 9 as my first number. Then I am going to draw 6 negative counters because negative 6 is what we're adding to 9. Then, just for my sake, I am going to cross out 6 positives and 6 negatives from each row. As you can see, I am left with 3 positives, making the answer to this question 9 plus negative 6, positive 3. Here is one more example. Negative 6 plus 5 equals. Once again, I'm going to draw some counters to help me figure out this problem. First, I am going to draw negative 6 counters. Then I'm going to draw 5 positive counters. Finally, I am going to cross out counters on both sides until I am left with only one type of counter, either positive or negative. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I am left with 1. So the answer to negative 6 plus positive 5 is negative 1. Now let's look at 2 quick rules for adding positive and negative numbers. Rule number 1 says that if both addends have the same sign, that is, they are both positive or both negative, add the number parts and write the sign of the addends in front of the sum. Here is an example of this rule. Let's use the problem negative 6 plus negative 3. Step number 1 is to add the number parts. 6 plus 3 equals 9. Step number 2 is to write the sign of the addends in front of the sum. Negative 6 plus negative 3 equals negative 9. Here is rule number 2. If the addends have unlike signs, i.e. 1 is positive and 1 is negative, subtract the smaller from the larger number part and write the sign of the addend with the larger number part in front of the answer. Here is an example. This problem reads negative 8 plus 6 equals. Step number 1 is to subtract the smaller from the larger number part. This looks like 8 minus 6 equals 2. The second step is to write the sign with the larger number part in front of the answer. Negative 8 plus 6 equals negative 2. Here is your practice problem of the day. First, solve the problem negative 3 plus negative 3. Then, solve the problem 9 plus negative 4 equals. Good luck!